The Keurig had been making that same rattling noise for 3 weeks, and every morning I told myself I'd finally say something to facilities about it. And every morning I didn't. Because some things you just learn to work around when you've been somewhere long enough. I'd been at Hargrove Capital for 2 years and 4 months. Long enough to know that the third-floor printer jammed on anything over 40 pages, that the cleaning crew came through at 9:15 on Tuesdays, so you had to move your trash can, or they'd just leave, and that my desk outside Elliot Hargrove's office needed to be staffed by 7:30 a.m., or the entire day started wrong. Not because he'd ever said so explicitly, he hadn't, but I'd watched what happened during my first week when I was late by 11 minutes due to a train delay, and the ripple effect through 3 meetings, 2 phone calls, and 1 very tense conversation with his legal team told me everything I needed to know about the importance of those 11 minutes. Elliot Hargrove ran a private equity firm that managed roughly $4 billion in assets. He was 38 years old, unmarried, allergic to small talk, and completely indifferent to what anyone thought about any of those facts. He took his coffee black, answered emails faster than any human being I'd ever worked for, and had the particular kind of focus that made junior associates nervous and made me, after a certain adjustment period, feel something closer to respect. I was good at my job. Genuinely good, not just competent. I could anticipate a problem before it surfaced, manage 3 competing priorities without dropping any of them, and keep a calendar so airtight that Elliot had once told me, in the closest thing to a compliment I'd received in the first 6 months, that I was the only assistant he'd ever had who understood that time was not a renewable resource. I'd spent 2 years building something here, a reputation, a rhythm, a life that made sense. I wasn't going to complicate it by noticing that Elliot Hargrove had the kind of gray eyes that made you feel like you were being read every time he looked at you. I'd been very disciplined about not noticing that. The tulips arrived on a Tuesday. Not roses, not a dramatic crimson arrangement, just a clean bunch of pale yellow tulips in a simple glass vase, sitting on my desk when I came in from getting the morning briefing materials from the printer. No card attached. The front desk had logged the delivery at 7:04 a.m., addressed to me by name. I stood there for a moment, genuinely puzzled, going through my mental list of who might send flowers to my office. It was short. My mother sent things to my apartment. My college friends weren't the flower-sending type. I wasn't seeing anyone. I'd gone on exactly 2 dates in the past 8 months, and neither had progressed to the point where surprise workplace flower deliveries made any sense. I put them to the side and got on with the morning. Elliot noticed them at 8:47. I knew because he stopped walking toward his office. That's how I registered it, the particular absence of his footsteps, which I'd unconsciously memorized the rhythm of over 2 years, the way you memorize a song you never meant to learn. "Those yours?" he asked, apparently. I didn't look up from the contract amendment I was cross-referencing. No card. They were here when I got in. A pause. "You were expecting them?" I just said there's no card, so no. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll have the building log pulled. We should know who had access to this floor before 7. "It's just flowers, Mr. Hargrove." He walked into his office without responding. I finally looked up, and through the glass panel beside his door, I could see him standing with his back to me, phone already to his ear, which meant he was either calling Marcus and building security, or he was making a call I wasn't supposed to know about. With Elliot, it was sometimes hard to tell. The tulips sat on the corner of my desk for the rest of the day, cheerful and completely unconcerned with the tension they'd apparently generated. I found out who sent them 3 days later, and not in the way I expected. His name was Donovan Reed. I knew him slightly. He worked in acquisitions at a firm that had recently been in preliminary talks with Hargrove Capital, the kind of talks that were professional and cordial, and hadn't led anywhere yet. We'd met twice at events I'd attended in my professional capacity, meaning I was there to manage Elliot's schedule and make sure he got out on time, and Donovan had made conversation with me while Elliot talked to people more important to him. He was pleasant, attractive in an easy, uncomplicated way. He'd asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime, and I'd said maybe, which in my vocabulary meant I hadn't actively closed the door, but I hadn't exactly opened it either. Apparently, he'd interpreted it differently. The second arrangement arrived on a Friday, bigger this time, A proper bouquet with a card that said, "Looking forward to that coffee." D. My coworker Tasha, who sat at the satellite desk near the elevator and missed nothing, came by at lunch with the particular expression of someone who had information and could not wait to share it. "People are talking," she said. "About flowers. About who sent them." She leaned on the edge of my desk. "Someone in legal ran his name. Donovan Reed. Isn't that the guy from Meridian Group?" "Yes. The firm Elliot's been doing the dance with for 3 months?" I looked at the Tulips. Then at the new arrangement, which was considerably more elaborate. "Yes. Well." She straightened up. "That's either a very sweet coincidence or a very not sweet one." I didn't say anything because I was already doing the math, and I didn't particularly like where it was landing. Elliot called me into his office at 4 o'clock, which was unusual for a Friday. He typically tried to keep Fridays clear of internal meetings, preferring to use them for work that required uninterrupted thought. I brought my notebook out of habit. He was standing at the window when I came in. That particular posture, back straight, hands loose at his sides, looking at the skyline, meant he was containing something. I'd learned to read his body language the way you learn a second language, slowly, then all at once. "Close the door," he said. I did. "Donovan Reed has sent you flowers twice this week. I'm aware. He works for Meridian Group, I know. We are in active preliminary discussions with Meridian Group." He turned from the window, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite categorize. Not anger. Something more controlled than anger. "Do you understand what I'm saying? You're suggesting his interest in me might not be entirely personal. I'm not suggesting anything." His voice was careful. "I'm laying out facts." I sat with that for a moment. The thing about Elliot was that he rarely said more than he meant, and he meant more than he said. "What do you need from me?" Something shifted in his face, fractionally. "Nothing. I wanted you to have the information." "That's not like you." He almost smiled. It didn't fully develop, but it was there for a second at the corner of his mouth. "No, I suppose it's not." He moved to his desk, picking up a folder with the focused energy of someone redirecting themselves. "Go home early. You haven't taken a Friday afternoon in 2 months. I have the Whitfield correspondence to finish. Monday, the quarterly summary." "Monday, Noah." I stopped. He almost never used my first name. In 2 years I could count the times on one hand, and they had all been moments of some significance, though I hadn't always known why at the time. "Okay," I said. I went home, sat in my apartment with my second glass of wine, and tried to figure out why I felt unsettled. I'd been given an unexpected Friday afternoon. A man I'd met twice had sent me flowers. Neither of those things should have produced the low hum of anxiety, currently running underneath my thoughts. But it wasn't either of those things, not really. It was the way Elliot had said I wanted you to have the information, because in 2 years I had never known him to give someone information without a purpose attached to it. Donovan texted the following Tuesday. He said the flowers weren't a business play, they were a personal one, and he'd take full responsibility for the timing being awkward. He'd like to buy me dinner and prove that he was actually a normal person who'd developed a genuine interest in a woman he'd met at 2 separate professional events and couldn't stop thinking about. It was a good message. Well constructed, a little self-deprecating, not pushy. I read it twice and didn't respond immediately. I mentioned it to Elliot. Not the content, just that Donovan had reached out, because it felt relevant to whatever calculations he was running about Meridian Group, and because I'd always operated with a certain transparency with him that had become, over time, something I valued for its own sake. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to go?" "I haven't decided. What would help you decide?" I looked at him across his desk. That was a strange question from Elliot Hargrove, who typically treated other people's personal decisions as information he filed away, rather than territory he engaged with. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Usually I trust my gut, and my gut isn't giving me anything clear right now." He picked up his pen, clicked it once, the way he did when he was thinking something he wasn't going to say. "Then wait until it does." I went back to my desk feeling no clearer and somehow, obscurely, less alone in the confusion, which was its own strange thing to feel about a man I addressed by his last name. I texted Donovan that I appreciated the message, and I was thinking about it. He responded, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." 2 weeks later, everything changed, and not because of Donovan Reed. I was in the copy room on a Thursday afternoon when I accidentally answered a call meant for Elliot. It happened sometimes. His cell had a way of forwarding to the main desk line when he was on another call, and I'd picked up on autopilot before the caller had said anything beyond Elliot. Except the voice that followed wasn't trying to reach Elliot professionally. It was a woman's voice, low and precise, and what she said was, "I have the updated documentation you requested, the kind that doesn't exist in any official system." I hung up immediately, sat very still for about 10 seconds, then went to Elliot's office and knocked. He was on a call. He held up one finger. I waited in the doorway until he wrapped up. "Someone just called your line," I said. It forwarded to my desk. A woman. She said she had documentation you'd requested that doesn't exist in any official system. The quality of his stillness changed. What exactly did she say? I repeated it word for word. I'd always had a good memory for language. He was quiet for a moment that stretched past comfortable then. "Did you recognize the voice?" "No good," he said it quietly. "Not to me, exactly." Then he looked at me directly, and something in his expression was different. Not the usual controlled assessment, but something rawer underneath it. "How long have you worked for me?" 2 years and 4 months. "In that time, have I ever given you reason to question my judgment about what's appropriate and what isn't?" I thought about it honestly, the way he'd always seemed to want me to think about things. "No, then I'm going to ask you to trust that what you just overheard is something I'm handling, and that it's not what it sounds like." "Okay." He looked at me for another moment. "That's it? Okay? You just asked me to trust your judgment." "I do. Conditionally. Conditionally. I want to know eventually. Not now. But eventually." He nodded slowly. "Agreed." I went back to my desk, finished the Whitfield correspondence, and tried to ignore the feeling that the ground had shifted slightly under everything I thought I understood about this job. Tasha cornered me in the kitchen the next morning. She had a particular look, the one she got when she'd been doing research she technically wasn't supposed to do. "You know Donovan Reed's family has history with Elliot's father," she said, keeping her voice low. I set down my coffee cup. "What kind of history?" "The kind that involves a deal that went badly about 12 years ago. Meridian Group was his father's firm before he handed it to Donovan last year. Elliot's firm made a move that cost the elder Reed significantly." She paused. "I'm not saying the flowers are definitely a long game. But you're not saying it. I'm saying it's interesting information." I spent the rest of the morning reconsidering Donovan Reed's warm text messages with the particular cold clarity of someone who has just been handed a different lens. He called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. His message was easy and friendly, and said he was going to be at the Caldwell Foundation dinner next Thursday if I was attending, and he hoped I'd save him a seat. I was attending. Elliot was one of the event's major sponsors. I told Elliot about the call, all of it, the family history Tasha had mentioned, the invitation, the dinner. He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "How do you feel about it?" 2 weeks ago that would have been a strange question. Now it felt like something else. Like he was asking because the answer mattered to him in a way that wasn't purely strategic. Like I want to understand what's actually happening before I walk into a room with both of you. He stood up from his desk and moved to the window, the same posture as that first Friday with the tulips. "Sit down, Noah," I sat. 12 years ago, my father's firm and Gerald Reed's firm were in a joint venture that collapsed. My father walked away. Gerald Reed didn't, not cleanly. There were legal proceedings. Gerald Reed spent 3 years in a position I wouldn't wish on anyone, and he blamed my father for engineering it. He paused. When I took over the firm, I made a decision to approach Meridian Group about a potential partnership because I thought it was time to close an old wound rather than keep it open. Donovan is not his father. The preliminary talks were my initiative, and the woman who called about documentation that doesn't exist in any system. A long pause. She's someone I hired independently to verify that Meridian's books are what they claim to be, because I wanted to know if Donovan Reed was genuinely interested in a fresh start, or if he was using the talks as a pretext to gather intelligence on this firm. I sat with that, and the flowers to my desk. Yes, the word was flat. That's a variable I didn't anticipate. "Do you think he's using me?" He turned from the window. "I think it's possible. I also think it's possible he's exactly what he seems. A man who met someone he liked and didn't fully think through the awkward timing. He held my gaze. I don't know which is true. And that uncertainty is. He stopped. Uncomfortable, for reasons that are not entirely professional. The air in the room changed. In 2 years, Elliot Hargrove had never said anything to me that wasn't either professionally purposeful or professionally neutral. What he'd just said was neither. "Tell me what that means," I said. His jaw tightened slightly. "It means that when the building log came back with Donovan Reed's name on the visitor access for the morning of the first delivery, I sat with it for a long time before I decided how to respond. And that sitting with it was not comfortable, because it's a business complication. That's part of it." I waited. "You've been here 2 years and 4 months, he said. "You know how I operate. You know what I need before I know I need it. You've told me when I was wrong, and you were right when you did, and I've never told you how much that matters because I haven't." He stopped again. "I don't do this well. Whatever this is. Talking about things that aren't work. Yes." I stood up. I didn't know quite why. Some instinct about not having this particular conversation from across a desk. Elliot. It was the first time I'd used his first name in the office. He went very still. "I think Donovan Reed probably has complicated motivations," I said. "I think the timing is not a coincidence. And I think I was never seriously considering going to dinner with him, for reasons that I didn't want to look at too directly." He searched my face. Why not? Because looking at them directly meant thinking about this. I gestured between us. "And this is complicated. It is." "The dinner Thursday," I said. "I'll go. In my professional capacity, the way I always go to these things, and I'll talk to Donovan Reed, and I'll pay attention to what he says and what he doesn't say, and I'll come back and tell you what I find out. That's not." He stopped himself. Began again. "I don't want to use you to gather intelligence on someone who's been trying to take you to dinner. You're not using me. I'm making a choice." I held his gaze steadily. "But I have a condition." He almost smiled again, more completely this time. "Of course you do. After Thursday we talk. About what you just said, about what I just said. No more professional distance used as a convenient excuse." A long moment. Then, agreed. The Caldwell Foundation dinner was at a hotel in Midtown, the kind of event where the tables cost more than most people's rent, and the conversation was a careful mix of genuine philanthropy and strategic networking, with everyone understanding the ratio, but no one mentioning it. I wore my reliable navy dress. Not because I hadn't thought about wearing something different, but because the navy dress had deep pockets, and I considered that a non-negotiable feature for any event where I might need to spend 4 hours on my feet. Elliot found me at the check-in table at 7:15. He'd arrived separately, as we always did at these things. He looked at the dress, and something in his expression warmed slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a reading only I knew how to take. "You wore that to the Ashworth dinner in February," he said. "I did." I handed him his name badge. "I wasn't aware you tracked my wardrobe. I notice things." He took the badge and didn't look away immediately. "Be careful tonight." Donovan found me 20 minutes later, near the cocktail tables. He was as easy and handsome as I remembered, his smile genuinely warm in a way that made the whole thing harder rather than easier. "You came," he said. "I work these events. I know." He handed me a glass of wine I hadn't asked for. "Still glad to see you. How are you feeling about everything?" "My timing has been, objectively, terrible." "It has been," I agreed. "I've been thinking about why." Something in his expression shifted just slightly, a recalibration. "Have you, your family and the Hargroves have history?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes. Is that relevant to the flowers?" "I'm going to be honest with you," he said, and there was something in his voice that changed. Less smooth, more direct, like he'd decided something. "It started as relevant. Not as a romantic pursuit, but as I wanted access, proximity, someone inside that office who might share information without knowing she was sharing it." He looked at me steadily. "And then I actually talked to you, twice, and my motivations got considerably more muddled." I appreciated the honesty, genuinely. "What kind of information?" "Evidence of what Elliot Hargrove's firm did to my father." "What do you believe they did?" "Deliberately structured the joint venture so we'd take the loss when it collapsed." I thought about what Elliot had told me. I wanted to close an old wound rather than keep it open. And if I told you that the partnership talks were Elliot's initiative, that he reached out to Meridian because he wanted to correct something his father did wrong? Donovan's expression shifted through several things quickly. I'd say that's a convenient story. It might be, or it might be true. I set down my wine glass. What would it take to find out which? Information I don't have access to. What if I could get you access to the documentation that would clarify what actually happened 12 years ago, through a legitimate channel, disclosed to both parties, so there are no hidden plays? He was quiet for a long time. Why would you do that? Because if Elliot is what he says he is, then this ends cleanly, and if he's not, I paused, then I deserve to know that too. Donovan looked at me with something I recognized. Recalibration of a first impression. You're more complicated than Flowers suggested. Most people are. I found Elliot at the end of the evening, near the exit, exactly where I would have told him to wait if I'd been managing his schedule. He looked at my face and read it the way he read everything. Tell me, he said. I told him everything. Donovan's admission, what he'd been looking for, and what I'd proposed. Elliot was very still throughout. You offered him access to the documentation. I offered him a legitimate disclosure process. Both parties full transparency, legal oversight. If you're telling me the truth about your intentions with Meridian, then the documents support you, and Donovan Reed has to face the fact that he's been wrong about you. And if they don't support me, then I'll need to know that. I held his gaze. I said it before, conditionally. Trust is conditional. That's not a threat. It's just honest. Something in his expression did what I was beginning to understand, was the Elliot Hargrove equivalent of a significant emotional moment. Almost nothing visible, but a quality of stillness that was different from his default stillness. You're extraordinary, he said. Quietly, like it wasn't meant for the room, like it wasn't even entirely meant for me, but more like something he'd stopped preventing himself from saying. I know, I said, because I'd spent enough time diminishing things, and I was done with it. So let's go handle this. The next 3 weeks were the most professionally complicated of my career, and also, somehow, the most clarifying. Elliot disclosed the documentation to both legal teams simultaneously. The full record of the joint venture collapse, including the internal communications that showed his father, had indeed structured the deal in a way that protected Hargrove Capital at Meridian's expense. He didn't hide it. He didn't soften it. He sat across from Donovan Reed in a conference room and said, "My father did what you believed he did. I've spent the last 3 years trying to build something that operates differently. The offer to partner with Meridian was genuine, and I understand if you don't believe that, but the documentation is real, and I'm not going to ask you to trust me on anything you can verify instead." I wasn't in that meeting. I heard about it from Elliot afterward, when he came back to the office at 6:30, with his tie loosened by exactly 1 button, which was the Elliot equivalent of looking like he'd been through something. How did he take it? I asked. Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped. He sat down across from me in one of the chairs I kept for the few visitors he allowed, rather than behind his desk, which was unusual enough that I registered it immediately. He's not sure what he wants to do. About Meridian. He paused. You. I told Donovan Reed the night of the dinner that whatever he thought he wanted from me, the access component was off the table. That whatever happened with the firms had to be separate from whatever happened with me personally. I looked at Elliot evenly. He understood. Did he try to change your mind? He suggested I was making a mistake. And, I said, I tended to know my own mind. I paused. He sent a text the next day saying he respected that, and he was sorry for the complicated beginning. Elliot was quiet for a moment. You handled all of that without telling me. You told me you trusted my judgment about what I could handle. I did, then. I held his gaze. We said we'd talk. The quality of his attention sharpened. Yes, we did. I had practiced approximately 0 versions of this conversation in my head, which was unusual for me. I was someone who prepared, but some things resist preparation. In 2 years and 4 months, I have watched you operate. The way you treat people who work for you, the way you handle things that go wrong, the way you course-corrected on the Meridian situation when you could have done something much more convenient. I paused. I've been very careful not to think about any of that in certain ways, because it seemed like a door I shouldn't open. Why? Because I'm good at this job. Because I didn't want to mess up something that works. Because I started again. Because wanting something from someone you work for is a vulnerability, and I've spent a long time not being particularly interested in being vulnerable. He leaned forward slightly. What changed? The tulips, strangely enough. I almost laughed. Watching you react to someone else sending me flowers told me something I'd been avoiding knowing. What did it tell you? That I wasn't the only one who'd been careful. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. He stood up, and I stood up, because somehow remaining seated felt wrong for whatever this was becoming, and then there wasn't much space between us, and he was looking at me with that gray-eyed attention that I had spent 2 years and 4 months learning to receive without showing how it landed. I've wanted to say something he stopped, tried again. I don't have a practiced version of this, neither do I. That's fine. It's not fine, it's terrifying. The word came out drier than I expected, with a trace of self-awareness that was, somehow, the most attractive thing I'd ever heard him say. I have protocols for everything in my professional life. I have 0 protocols for this. Then we figure it out without protocols. That's not how I operate. I know. Try it anyway. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture so quiet and deliberate that it stopped my thoughts entirely. I've been careful, he said. You're right about that. For reasons that felt sensible when I first understood what I was being careful about. And now someone sent you flowers and I pulled the building log at 7 in the morning and briefed my security director before I'd even had my coffee. A pause. That's not professional oversight. That's something else. Yes, I said. It is. He kissed me, carefully the way he did everything. Not tentatively, but deliberately, like a decision made and committed to, and then less carefully, which was its own kind of information. When we stepped back, both of us were quiet for a moment. This is complicated, he said. It was already complicated. The power dynamic. I'm aware of it. We can discuss it properly and set up something formal if we want to. Or we can just agree to be honest with each other and revisit as needed. I looked at him. I'm not fragile, Elliot, and I'm not without options. I've had 3 recruiter calls this year I haven't returned. Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition. I know. I've seen the calendar. You go through my personal calendar? No. I notice things. A pause. I notice everything about you. That's the problem. I smiled, and it surprised me how easy it felt. Then notice this. I know what I'm choosing. I'm choosing it anyway. 2 months later, I sat across from him at a restaurant that wasn't connected to any business occasion. A first. And he ordered wine without consulting me, which should have been annoying and somehow wasn't, and told me that Donovan Reed had agreed to a restructured partnership agreement that corrected some of the original joint venture terms and acknowledged the historical imbalance. Not a full reckoning, but a step. His idea or yours? I asked. Mine. But he agreed more readily than I expected. He's trying to move forward, I said. Same as you. Is that what we're doing? His voice was quieter than the public setting required, angled toward me. Moving forward? I think we have been for a while, I said. We just needed the flowers. He looked at me with that particular quality of attention I'd spent years learning to read, and now read fluently. Not just the assessment, but underneath it, the thing he'd stopped being careful about. I'm going to tell you something, he said. Okay, I'm not good at the parts of this that aren't work. He gestured vaguely. The being known, the letting someone in. I've noticed, I've been working on it. I know, I said. I've noticed that too. The restaurant was warm and the wine was good. And outside the November street was cold and bright, and I thought about all the mornings I'd arrived at 7:30. And made sure everything was in order, and learned to read a person like a language. All the time that had been something I didn't let myself name. For what it's worth, I said, I'm not particularly good at the letting Simeon in part either. You seem good at it. I'm good at being competent and helpful. That's different. I turned my glass in my hands. Actually trusting someone is different. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. Just that. Simple, deliberate, present. Then we'll both work on it, he said. The rattling noise in the Keurig got fixed in December. Facilities finally replaced the machine after I sent an email that Elliot had actually reviewed before I sent it. Something he'd never done before, Because apparently being in a relationship with your employer means they now have opinions about your communication with building services. I told him the email was fine as written. He suggested 3 revisions. I accepted one, and he acknowledged that my original draft was better, which is as close as Elliot Hargrove gets to admitting he was wrong, and which I have come to understand as one of his specific forms of affection. Some things you learn about a person slowly, some things all at once, some things you already knew, but needed a reason to look at directly. The new machine doesn't rattle. It makes excellent coffee, and it's standing on the corner of the same desk where a bunch of yellow tulips sat for 5 days in October, uncomplicated and cheerful, starting something that turned out to be neither, and also, underneath all of it, the best thing I didn't see coming.